Okay, welcome to our today's class on comparative literature. As you see on the slide that today's class will be held on gender and thematics, that are the theoretical aspects of comparative literature. And in this regard, in our previous classes, we have talked about the several branches of comparative literature. According to French philosopher Michel Foucault, he has said that comparative literature can be compared in two different ways. One, measurements of minor language and major language and other issues. And apart from this, another issues that is relating to the travel history, that is the journey experience, the travel writings or travelogue. It means that towards the end of the 19th and 20th century, the theoretical concern has come in discussion of comparative literature. And comparative literature has got several sub-genres or sub-branches. And gender studies, already we have learned several gender studies, cultural studies, post-colonial studies. This theoretical underpinning has come in discussion for the comparatist of literature. Here we see that Quelp and Knox have suggested that in recent years, there has been a shift away from the concern of earlier comparatist, that is, away from the tendency to conceive of literary history as a great and unified cultural enterprise, away from the study of movements and themes. It means the historical background or the historical study of comparative studies has come into discussion to the study of movement and themes. That means the theme of literature will be discussed in comparative literature. And that is Clayton Koleb. And he is a professor of German and comparative literature at the University of North Carolina. And he has said that he and also accompanied with Susan Knox, the comparative perspectives on literature, approaches to theory and practice. This was written by Susan Knox and also this Koleb. And Susan Knox is a senior writer and news editor of CBC News. She spent 5 years at newspaper in Hong Kong and has worked for the Toronto Stars, and professor at University of Minnesota, United States. So these two persons, they said that there is a shift of comparative literature, and that once previously comparative literature had been dealing with a great and unified cultural enterprise, and now comparative literature will be talking about the movements of themes. Therefore, there has been a move away from the proposition outlined by René Wellek. René Wellek, already we have talked about René Wellek. René Wellek is an American Czech literary critic. and a comparative literary critic like Oelek was an eminent product of the Central European philological tradition and was known as a vastly erudite and fair-minded critic of critics. And René Oelek was born and raised in Vienna, speaking Czech and German. And he was born in Vienna, Austria, and died in United States. Okay. And he studied in Charles University and Faculty of Arts, Charles University. So this shift of comparative literature, that means cultural enterprise, from cultural enterprise to thematic movement, that was a shift from the idea delivered by René Walik in his essay. And the nature of comparative literature, according to René Walik, in which he states that comparative literature is identical with the study of literature dependent of linguistic, ethnic, and political boundaries. This was the idea delivered by René Walik. That means the linguistics, ethnic, and political boundaries of literature will be compared in comparative literature. And that idea was next time suggested by Koleb, that idea has been shifted to the movements or measurements of theme of literary text. Koleb and Knox's collection of essay does indeed seek to move away from the universalization approach, which perceives literature as ennobling or enabling force of humankind. This man, that means these two persons, they said that literature will be perceived for ennobling force of humankind and transcend all other barriers. The ideological implication of this attitude have already been discussed in previous chapter. We have discussed that is such a thing as great literature and assumes also whatever that thing is, it will unilaterally serve to raise human beings who come into contact with it to some higher state. It also assumes that literary systems are somehow divorced from their context and can operate as free floating agents through time and space across the forms or boundaries. It is, of course, a classic formalist viewpoint and one which has been enormously influential in Western Europe and in the United States. That means Koleb and Nweck's idea, that is the shift from the linguistics enterprise to the thematic enterprise or thematic discussion of comparative literature, that is very much similar to the formalist viewpoint of comparative literature. And that idea is developed in USA and the Western Europe. And what is the formalist viewpoint? We can have a look on this. In literary theory, formalism refers to critical approaches that analyze, interpret, and evaluate the inherent feature of a text. The formalistic approach reduces the importance of text historical, biographical, and cultural context. It means a literature should be judged and viewed on the theme and on the text only. That means historical background of the text, the historical background of the writer, ideology of the writer should be eradicated in terms of judging a literary pitch. That is the formalist approach of comparative literature or in literary theory. So Koleb and Knox's idea, that is the shift from the linguistics perspectives or cultural comparison towards the thematic perspectives of literature, is very much similar to the idea of formalistic approach of comparative literature. That was the basic tenet or characteristic of American comparative literature. Okay. And however, in their eagerness to propose a comparative literature that is more in tune with worldwide literary trends at the end of the 20th century, Koleb and Knox have focused prominently on the growing relationship between literary theory and comparative study. As I have mentioned a bit at the initial stage of this today's class, that means comparative literature now has got the relation with several critical approaches. That means post-colonial theory, cultural studies, translation studies, gender studies, and and other theoretical approach are now related to comparative literature, which has inevitably led them to assume that the study of movements and themes we are discussing about the thematics or the gender studies of comparative literature. So this movement is related, such kind of uh, shift of comparative literature can be called the study of movement or themes has moved into the background. And there has been a move away. That means there has been a move away from a concept of comparative literature based on assumption of a fundamentally humanizing role of literature. Literature will be a humanizing mission or element of civilization. There is another way of looking at the current trends or in literary analysis. So it is one point that literature will be viewed as a humanizing role or a humanizing tool. But there is another way of looking at literature, and that is the thematic approach. And the study of themes and movements not only continues unabated, but possibly is even on the increase. And day by day, we are discussing then themes and movements, other mm, other attitudes or fields are going to attach with the theme of study of themes and movement. And the difference is, of course, the impulse is now comparison from within areas of work defined under other headings than that of comparative literature, such as post-colonial studies or gender studies. So the post-colonial studies, gender studies, these are included to the study of movement and theme in comparative literature. And that is our today's discussion. In this regard, one person's name came forward. It is Sigbert Solomon Brouwer. He is a professor of the German language and literature at the University of Oxford. He was born in Germany, died in Oxford, United Kingdom. And it is his education, University of Cambridge, University of Birmingham, Christ College, Cambridge. So this man, Sigbert Brouwer, denotes a whole chapter of his book on comparative literature to a discussion of what he calls themes and prefigurations. He determines 5 different subjects of investigation, which includes, so this man suggested the 5 different aspects of thematic or study of themes and movements in comparative literature. Number 1, the literary representation of natural phenomena, what he calls perennial human problem and patterns of behavior. It means that human being will have some problem, historical problem, long-lived problem in their culture and in their behavior pattern. So firstly, comparative literature will be uh, discussing this pattern. Secondly, recurring motifs. Thirdly, recurrent situations. Fourthly, the literary representation of types. And fifth, the literary representation of named personage. He draws our attention to the fact that Raymond Trusson has suggested that the most fruitful area of comparative studies is the literary representation of named personage. And sorry, the literary Raymond Trusson has suggested that the most fruitful area of Power insists, however, upon the significance of thematic study as a means of showing not only how a theme might appear and disappear across culture as a part of study of literary theory. Okay. So one theme of literature might be changed in a different time and cultural setting. One literature can be studied in a different thematic approach based on the cultural idea or cultural discussion or the cultural movement related to the text, but also as a means of attempting or unravel why that process might have taken place. In other words, the study of a theme should interest students of literature no less than students of society or political ideas. In her introduction to her anthology, The New Feminist Criticism, published in 1986, Elaine Schwalter, most probably we have got Elaine Schwalter. She is American literary critic and feminist, and a writer on cultural and social issues. She is one of the founder of feminist literary criticism in United States academia, developing the concept and practice of gynocritics, a term describing the study of women as writers. Ellen Schwalter, she is a feminist and she has written idea relating to feminists, that is the gynocriticism literature written by female writer or women, and that is also called gynotext. And as we have we have got an idea that when the travel journey was written by male writer, the male writer can present a different way. When a female writer writes a journey relating to the several issues, then the writing might be different. In the same way, when a male writer will be writing about female, that is another, that would be described in a different way. And when a female writer will be writing a text and will be describing the position of women, that would be a different analysis or observation. And this feminist critic, Elaine Schwalter, she has written a book. The name of her book is The New Feminist Criticism, that was published in 1986. And she suggests that one of the earliest manifestations of feminist criticism concerned on exposing the misogyny of literary practice, the stereotype images of women in literature. So how women are presented in literature. From the time past, we see that female characters in uh, literature, we have um, several characters that will come in our discussion. But uh, Elaine Schwalter, she said that the women characters, they have been presented in literature that is a very stereotype presentation. Either the women character had been presented as angels or monsters. She said that as angels or monsters. The literary abuse or textual harassments of women in classics, she said, Ellen Schwalter said that these women presented in classic literature that is a literary abuse or textual harassment of women, and the popular male literature by told by Ellen Schwalter, the male literature and the exclusion of women from literary history. The second phase of feminist criticism, according to Schwalter, focused on the text produced by women with a view to revisiting traditionally male-determined literary history. So Ellen Schwalter has come with the idea of gynotext or gynocriticism, literature written by, that is literature written by women. And um, in this regard, she wanted to say that the women are presented by female writers. That is the second trend or phase of feminist criticism. She said, so that we now have a coherent, if still incomplete, narrative of female literary history, which describes the evolutionary stage of women writings during the last 205 years, from imitations through protest of self-definition, and defines and traces the connections throughout history and across the national boundaries of the recurring image. Recurring image, that means female, as she has told it earlier, that the stereotype presentation of women, that means either women are presented as angels or monster. So such kind of presentation of women in literature occurs successively from the past 200 years back, from the and again in the current situation, following the recurring images, themes, plots, and emerge from women's social, psychological, and aesthetic experience in male-dominated culture. So that is given by Ellen Schwalter. Schwalter's position in radical in that it forces a revision of assumption about the literary canon, but it is surprisingly formalist and close to Welleck view in its conception of movements across national boundaries. That means literature will be presenting something, as we have discussed it earlier, to present literature across the national boundaries. When a literature will be read in a specific cultural setting, that will have one meaning. When the text will be discussed and analyzed in other setting, that will have another explanation and analysis. That was the suggestion done by Rene Wallick. So this Alan Schwalter approach of gynotext or gynocriticism is similar to Rene Wallick's idea of crossing national boundaries regarding a literary text. What she seems to be suggesting that there is such a thing as universal patterning in the presentation of women and women's writing, regardless of the socio-economic and political context in which these texts are produced. Ellen Schwalter suggested that we should discard the historical background and the setting of a text, and we should judge it um, in a very objective approach towards women in literature. But the purpose of this chapter is not to continue the well-established debate of the historicity or otherwise some connection of the women's textual production. Rather, the purpose is to draw attention to the importance of thematic study. So, as um, Susan Bassnett said, that the thematic study still has too many critics today, though not necessarily described as such. It is also significant that a great many women writers, artists are concerned with exploring archetypes, with rewriting the story of some of the most prominent archetypal figures in Western cultural history. And so, for example, Erin Mo Mochkine's 1992 version of the story of the House of Atreus present a sympathetic view of Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra, we know the character. Most probably you have studied Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. In case of Agamemnon, you might read Agamemnon and Clytemnestra as a woman. But here, Arian Mochanik presented a opposite version, the different version of Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra, as a woman, betrayed her husband, Agamemnon, into handing over her beloved daughter Iphigenia, supposedly to be married, but actually to be sacrificed at her own father's hand. And the image of Clytemnestra as an adulteress, as the unfaithful wife who murders her husband on his return from Troy, thus appears in a very different light. So here in this writing by Arian Mochanik, 1992, we know the history of Clytemnestra, that Clytemnestra was wife of Agamemnon, and uh, Agamemnon and Menelaus, they went to try to fight for rescuing Helen. And when they were going some times forward, they saw some ominous sign. And at that time, by prophecy, they have understood that Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, should be sacrificed. So Agamemnon called Clytemnestra that Iphigenia, that means Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's daughter, will be married to a prince, and Iphigenia was taken with them. But next time, Agamemnon himself sacrificed Iphigenia, that means their own daughter. And for this reason, Clytemnestra was very much angry. And when Agamemnon returned back from Troy, then this very hero, Agamemnon, was killed by Clytemnestra. This is the history. But, and in this history, classic history of Troy and Iliad, that means Clytemnestra has been presented as a woman who has killed her own husband. Yeah. But we have to have another view that Agamemnon also killed their daughter, Iphigenia, with their own hand. But Clytemnestra was criticized very vehemently, very negatively. But Agamemnon, so here in this writing, Aaron Marchuk in 19, No Chutney in 1992 gave us a different view of Clytemnestra. And again, we see another view of this writing. Sorry, where it has gone, I am not getting. So next time, such kind of archetype presentation of literature we see in present stereotype presentation of women we see in media also. Here, equally, the remarkable interest in media by theater companies right across the European 1980 to 1990s decades reflect an attempt to come to terms with an archetype that has traditionally been seen as a figure of horror. So this is the position of Clytemnestra we have discussed. And again, we see another female character in classic literature, that is Medea. And in Europe in 1980 and 1990 decades, we see the same scenario, that media has been presented in a very archetype character. That means either a angel or either a monster.
Monster.
Yes. That means media, the mother who murders her children. In case of Clytemnestra, we see that Clytemnestra killed her husband. Here we see that media murders her children. Interpretation of media vary from the depicting her as an outsider, often a black woman, ostracized by Hellenic culture, and considered dispensable when Jason tends to marry for political reasons. Let's have a look to media. Okay, what is the history of Medea? Medea in Greek mythology, Medea is the daughter of King Aeetes of Colchis, the niece of Circe, and the granddaughter of the sun god Helicos. This is Medea in mythological character, Medea. Okay, and Medea in Greek mythology, an enchantress, that means a female magician, a woman who uses magic to put someone or something under a spell, who helped Jason, leader of the Argonauts, to obtain the golden fleece from her father, King Atreus of Colchis. She was of divine descent and had the gift of prophecy. Medea could say what gonna happen next. She married Jason and used her magic power and advice to help him. Okay. And in case of Medea, I will slay the children I have born, are the words of Euripides Medea. So Euripides, the Greek dramatist, she quotes the speech of Medea. Medea is speaking, I will slay the children I have born, are the words of Euripides Medea when she decides that she will kill her children in order to take revenge on her husband. Okay. So in case of Clytemnestra, we have seen that in order to get revenge for their daughter, Clytemnestra killed her husband. Again, here we see that Medea, she decided to kill her husband, kill her children in order to revenge her husband. So we see the um, same kind of story, that women have been presented as a monster, as a negative character in literature. In revenge, she murders Creusua, the king, with the poison gift, and later murders her own sons by Jason before fleeing for Athens, where she eventually marries King Ageenus. Other traditions mention several other causes of death for Medea's sons. Medea in wrecked sent a dress and coherent covered with poison, causing the death both Glaus and her father. She then killed her children and fled to Athens on a golden chariot sent by her grandfather, the god Heli, Helios. Okay, so you see on the image, this is Medea, and she is a female magician. So we see the archetype or stereotype presentation of women in literature. So here we see that the similarity between Clytemnestra and Medea. Yet another interpretation explores some of the issues raised by Adrienne Rich in her groundbreaking book of Women Born, Motherhood, Experience and Institution, which examines the social implication of infanticide. Okay, so after getting the idea of Clytemnestra and Medea, here we get another female writer. We have we know already the name of Adrienne Rich. That means we have studied a poem that is Adrienne Rich, Aunt Jennifer Tiger, isn't it? So here
Yes.
she has written a book. That book is Of Women Born, Motherhood as Experience at Institution, which examines the social implication of infanticide. Uh, so Adrienne Rich, okay, we know that was an American poet, essayist, and feminist. She was called one of the most widely read and influential poets of the second half of the 20th century and was credited with bringing the oppression of the women and lesbians to the forefront of poetic discourse. Okay, so in poetry, women are oppressed by the male writer. So Adrienne Rich is a um, widely read writer in the second half of the 20th century regarding feminist criticism. And there are some notable quotes of Adrienne Rich. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. Lying is done with words and also with silence. When a woman tells the truth, she is creating the possibility for more truth around her. So these are the quotes of Adrienne Rich. And in case of the idea of infanticide, the female body is perhaps doomed to remain an object of derision, violence, and political propaganda. Adrienne Rich has explained its beauty. That means the beauty of the women body is either eroticized or regarded with suspicion. That means women cannot be beautiful. If women becomes beautiful, that will have several explanation to everyone or to several persons. Its bodily functions, in particular, menstruation, menstruation and childbearing, are still shrouded in superstitions. At the time of Adrienne Rich of Women Born was published in 1976, not much had been written about invisible but life-giving parts of the female anatomy. However, women born, that means women bodily function, women's body anatomy has been analyzed in a very negative pain. However, it cannot be understood that the women are the uh, life-giving parts. That means the women. Without women, we can't get the new generation. It hasn't been viewed in such a way that viewed, explained by Adrienne Rich. And of note, though, in Annie Sexton sensual 1969 poem, in celebration of my uterus, everyone in me is a bird. I am breathing all my wings. They wanted to cut you out, but they will not. They said you were immeasurably empty. They mean the male and you mean the female, but you are not. They said you were sick unto dying, but they were wrong. You are singing like a schoolgirl, you are not drawn. So this is another poem written by Anne Sexton. Research, Adriani research of women born is impassioned, much like Sexton's poetry, but it is also scholarly in its critique of the institutionalization of motherhood, fragmentarily in structure, frank and intimate in delineating rich own experience. What Adrienne Rich saw in her own life that he has presented in this book of Women Born that was published in 1976. Novelist and poet Alexander Theorox condemned it by calling a less a female manifesto than the Confession of Saint Adriani. Okay. The hodgepodge of 10 aggravated aces. So such kind of writing has been viewed and criticized very negatively. This book is an absolute radical witchery, the bookend to its male chauvinist counterpart. Okay. So this is the chauvinist, that means excessive feeling for someone's own race. That is excessive patriotism can also called chauvinism. Okay. So here, this writing, Adrian's writing of Women Born, was viewed very negatively in literature. So as we see that in case of comparative literature, we have got gender studies, and in case of women, we see that women has been presented in a very stereotype or the archetype attitude in literature. However, in comparative literature, we see at present the movement of change. So once upon a time, that was the linguistics and cultural comparison we see in comparative literature, but at present, comparative literature is included with other subgenres or subsection, that is gender studies, post-colonial studies, translation studies will be included in literature. And in case of gender studies, as the title suggests that we haven't discussed yet the case of Guinevere, but we have discussed about the several female characters like Clytemnestra and also Medea. And by analyzing the text, we have understood that the very notion presented by the female critic that women in literature has been presented in a very stereotype or in a very archetype presentation, even in classic literature and all other literature. So the approach, that means moving or shifting comparative literature from the historical and the linguistics or cultural background to the other fields like study of the themes and measurement is can be viewed as a very much um, uh, formalistic approach relating or similar to the American approach of comparative literature and also the Western um, Western Europe approach of comparative literature. So with this note, I want to conclude this today's class. Okay, so we will continue another lecture on the same issue. So thank you very much for attending the